family of orangutans. And then there was another, which is even more disturbing. So that's this picture that's right here.
Can you see that, Ace?
I know
it's
it's hard
to be a little
to
closer?
zoom into.
Does it need to be a little closer? Can you see it now? Okay.
So that is absolutely just horrifying.
It's unacceptable
for anyone to post. But I think what the huge issue is here, because lots of people did come on the forums and make comments and say, well, what about free speech? You know, we have the right to have our own opinion and we can have free speech. But now here's another one that's clearly a reference to lynching.
Closer? Ace? Okay.
And we've got Clint Eastwood here with his noose up. So, you know, this is, to me, a clear reference to violent acts that have been perpetrated against people of color right here in this country. You want to bring that empty chair over here, this rope is for you. That, from anyone, I would feel horrified by, threatened by, endangered by. But the fact that this is coming from a mayor who is an elected official, who is representing all the people that are in his borough, and there are Black, Hispanic people that are in West York Borough, that this man is supposed to be representing their best interests. He's supposed to be caring for them. This man is in charge of a lot of the police department in West York Borough. He is charged with working with the school district. He's charged with working with the business owners. He's charged with making sure that laws are put in place to protect all the citizens. Can you really tell me that someone with these views that thinks this is okay to put out there is someone that it's okay to be charged with the protection of Black people? I say no, and so do a lot of people. So now his own city council and his own chief of police have joined in condemning these actions, and the city council has expressed that on Monday morning they plan to ask for his resignation. So it's going to be a matter of, we'll see if he actually resigns on Monday, but this is not just going to end there. There's a lot of people throughout York County that say this is not how we're to be represented, this is not what we consider acceptable, and are really pressing to call for this man's resignation. But, you know, his response when the newspaper contacted him was, it's just some bullshit happening at the council building, and hung up on the reporters, challenged by his city council people, refused to take the images down, and just blocked his own city council people. So this is a man who's very dedicated to these views, and that's the reality that people of color are still dealing with trying to live in York County today. And I think that's the saddest and scariest part of this whole situation.
I think, you know, going back to this free speech, you know, we need to stop just giving people carte blanche because it's free speech, because it's not, this is hate mongering. This is not free speech. Free speech is, you know, if I say, well, you know, I watched your show, Carla, I really didn't like it. That's free speech. But when you're saying something derogatory, when you're comparing an African American person to a gorilla or orangutan, or, you know, alluding to lynching them, that is uncalled for. It's hateful. It's hate mongering. And I'm sorry, that man should be arrested, because I can tell you, if I called somebody, if I called an official and I said something like that, I would be arrested. So why is he any different? We have to stop this disparity between the different financial and the economic levels too. Just because he's a council person and he's got some money and he's white, sorry, it's still, the law is the law. If you're going to do a terroristic threat, then you should be in jail. That's how I feel about it.
And I definitely think you hit on something so important, which is there is a difference in how people are treated based on the color of their skin, based on how much money they have, based on who they know. And I mean, that's why Pennsylvania, as much as it's our home and we love it, is rated one of the top in the nation for corruption, because we already know on both sides of the line, we've got Democrats, we've got Republicans, people that are being arrested for corruption. We've got CEOs, we've got tons of issues with people that are operating outside of the system. So it becomes so important to say, what what can we hold people accountable for? How can we hold these people accountable? And we have to start in our own communities and our own counties and say, you know what, you have to be responsible for your actions. If you want to feel how you're going to feel, we can't stop you. But there are laws in place, there are procedures in place to stop you from being able to use your views to hurt others. And when you frighten someone, when you threaten them, when you use a threatening, terroristic type of image like this as someone in authority to cause harm to people, I mean, that's the kind of thing that's not free speech, that's threats. Frankly, the disrespect of the president could just as easily be considered treason, 100 or 200 years ago. Why should it be acceptable for anyone to get away with this? And you're right, depending on who it was, it would be considered totally different. People would lose their jobs across this country if they said something like that.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And, I moved to York in 2009. I knew a little bit of the history. I knew about the Ku Klux Klans coming through. I knew about the racism. I knew about these things. But I have to say, I moved into this. I was forced moving into the city in 2012 because I was legally evicted. When I got into the city, I got an amazing education, and it wasn't a very nice education either. And just to back up really quickly, when you're talking about the corruption, when I was at the conference, they were talking about long-term care, like going to nursing homes and such. Pennsylvania is rated 42nd
out of 50.
Out of 50 as one of the worst places for long-term care services.
Wow.
And yeah, because the way the system's stacked, it's stacked for the nursing homes, put people in nursing homes, put them in institutions. So, what Carla's saying is absolutely true. And when I moved here in 2012, I remember I was in the homeless shelter, and I remember being very upset about, I didn't have a home or anything, and I had and she was white, and she said to me, she said, "Don't worry about it." She said, "Because you'll get housing, you'll get taken care of because you're white, you're a woman, and I'm like, what?
What?
Yeah, that, and it didn't really sink in until I went to a Cherry Lane Park, was where a lot of us would hang out during the afternoon hour.
Sure.
And there were one of the ladies who was from the shelter is African American, and her boyfriend was with her, and other friends were there. And I would sit and I would talk to her boyfriend. I would talk to all of them. I would talk to her boyfriend. She didn't have a problem with it. She knew we were just talking. And one day I was talking to him, and he looked at me very seriously, and he said, "You should be careful." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You should be careful talking to me." Why? He said, "Because in this city, a white woman talking to a black man, fraternizing with a black man," he said, "I don't want to see you get hurt." That blew my mind. We're talking 2012.
Right.
This is like my mom. Back in this is during the Korean conflict. My father was stationed in Germany, and it was an MP station in Germany, and he met a guy that was from I believe it was Kentucky, and so you were talking about the South.
Right.
And at one point, my mom and dad, my dad took my mom to visit this guy when they were on leave or whatever, and my mom and the guy's sister went into town. And my mom we walk into this little store. It's like a little store that has like a little restaurant in it too. And she went and she sat down. And she said, and my mom said, as soon as she sat down, the sister had this horrified look on her face. And she said, "You can't sit there, you can't sit there." My mom's like, "Why?" Yeah. And she said, "Because that's where the colored sit." And my mom is like, "What?" My mom she's from Pennsylvania. My mom had no idea. She was like, this was totally foreign to her. Right. And that's what I grew up with. Now my dad could be a bit, racist, but my mom was, she loved everybody and she cared about everybody and she didn't care. This was back like, 70s or so, in 70s, 80s, and she would come home. She worked in a factory, and she'd come home and she'd talk about there she'd say, well, of course, back then the term was colored, you know. And she'd say, well, there are these two colored ladies, and they're really nice. And she would ask them questions. She'd have a dialogue with them. And she asked one of them one time, she said, do you get sunburned? And she said the woman laughed at her and said, well, yeah, we get sunburned. But my mom was asking it not out of ignorance. She really truly wanted to know. And I think that's the big difference, because they understood that. And there was also there was a lesbian couple at that point too. And I remember mom would come home and she said she did like, they're gays, but they're really nice. It's
well, there is that just reflects the importance of media and of education. That when you see images on television, if you don't know black people, if you don't know gays and lesbians, if you don't know Hispanic people that are different than you don't know what their reality is like, what their culture is like, what their experience is like. And even in 2017, even years after those exchanges, that is still one of the biggest issues that I run into and that I hear about when I'm doing community organizing work. People coming to me and complaining about that it's before you even get to the racial issues where someone experienced racism, are people that are still getting, well, racism doesn't exist here. This is north of the Mason-Dixon line. We're in the north. There is no racism. There is no difference between what black people and white people go through. There's no difference in our experiences. Well, I'm white, but I'm poor, so I experience the same issues that you do. Well, I've had people be mean to me. Well, I've had trouble in life. I don't have any privilege. So there are still, in 2017, people that are denying that white privilege exists, people that are denying that police brutality exists, people that are denying that racism still exists, that people of color have different levels of opportunity for education, for jobs, for safety, for housing in this country. Not that there's not struggle if you are poor, not that there isn't struggle if you're a woman, if you're gay, if you're disabled. There's lots of different reasons for struggle, but being of color is one of them. And we can't even have the reconciliation conversations, the healing conversations, if we're still having people that refuse to admit that there's even an issue, or the people that don't care if there's an issue because they don't know black people, they don't know gay people, they don't know Hispanic people, they don't know disabled people, but they're learning from television, from media, these negative images, and they only cling to those images. And I think we see that a lot in York, because we have this really huge divide between the city and the county, right? We have the county, which has a hugely majority percentage of white residents, and then the city, which is more than 60% black and Latino. So there's this perception that, the problems of the city are problems of black and brown people, when really they're frequently problems of poor people, problems of people without jobs, without quality housing, without adequate social services, without transportation, without safety, and a police department that has the numbers to really be effective and keep people's homes from being broken into, cars from being broken into, harassment from happening. But the people in the county, they're not thinking about all these different things because they're not asking those people. They don't know those people. They don't have relationships with people that live in the city. So they just see the black and brown faces and they say, oh, look, well, they're just in there shooting each other up again. Well, that's how black and brown people act. Like, you can't give them anything nice. You can't let black and brown people have anything. But, do you know any black and brown people when you make these judgments? And a lot of them, they don't. Or they'll say, well, there is that black guy I work with at the factory. There is that Hispanic guy that lives next door to me. But, they're different. They're nice. I get told that all the time. Well, I don't really like black people, but you know what? I like you. You're all right. Well, I don't really like Hispanic people, but, you're all right. You're cool. Okay, I am black people. I am a person of color. And if you can have a relationship with me, you can have a relationship with anyone else. But when we make these assumptions, without really knowing people to back them up, without taking the time. I mean, I'm sure you've had people make assumptions about you before they ever took the time to really have a conversation about you.
Yeah, especially with mental illness.
That's right. You and I have talked about that, that, you know, people think, oh, well, you know, if she was homeless, she must not be educated. And then you come for them with the, actually, speaking of education and eloquence and writing skill and talent, people that think because you're mentally ill, oh my gosh, she battles with mental illness, so she must not be capable of handling things. Oh no, I can actually handle very sophisticated campaigns. My dealing with a mental disorder is one part of me. It's not my entire world. It's not my entire identity. Well, being Black or Hispanic is one part of an individual who has a whole history, a whole personality, a whole life. And so to think that every person from one group would be the same, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And the people saying that wouldn't want to be considered in that way. Well, you know what all white people are like. Well, don't compare me to him, and I'm this, and this is where I'm from, and this is my religion, and this is my culture, and this is what kind of parents I had, this is what school I went to, this is what music I'm into, all these different qualifiers. Well, Black people have those same differences too. Hispanic people have those same differences. I don't understand it, but that's got to be the beginning, I think, of any racial justice or racial reconciliation conversation, is that you cannot judge people based on a race. You have to judge them on an individual personality, on an individual basis, one person at a time. And we have to acknowledge that there is enough racism in our history that no matter what their personality is, Black and brown people are dealing with some really thoughtless stereotypes, just like people with mental illness deal with them. One person with bipolar disorder has a totally different level of capability than someone else. One person who has been homeless might have a totally different level of education or different reason for homelessness, different interests, different talents, different needs to get out of that situation or change that situation. The only way you can figure out what they need is by meeting with them, by analyzing them, by talking to them, by asking them. Same thing with people of color.
And that, you're making good points too. That was one of the reasons why I was asked to speak at the press conference. Patrick Keenan told me flat out, he said, I'd like to get you involved because you're breaking that stereotype, you're breaking that stigma. And what bothers me is that I put myself out there all the time, but trying to get other people that have an education or have a business, they're scared. They don't want to say, I have a mental illness, because right away it's that stigma. But what they don't understand is that it'll perpetuate until you start standing up and saying, I have a mental illness, so what? I have dark skin, so what? I have light skin, so what? In the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't mean much.
Yeah, that's true. But that's one of the reasons I think that putting protective laws in place and anti-discrimination laws in place is so important across the board, because I struggle with that when doing community activism, when working with Put People First and going out there and talking to people and asking them to say, well, what are your human rights violations? You know how hard it is in York County to get someone to say, well, I'm discriminated against in my housing, because we are an at-will state for landlords. So if your landlord sees that you're speaking out against how they treat you, they can just evict you. They can say, you know what, you don't like it, get out. 30-day notice. No, you don't get your security deposit back. No, you don't get any money to find another place. Get out. And that's legal here. If you complain that your boss is harassing you, or you complain that your coworkers are calling you the N-word or are making racial slurs or treating you in a harassing way, your employer can just fire you with no other protections. Now, like York City has adopted some city laws to protect people, but most of the county municipalities have not. And even here in the city, the police don't enforce those protections. The HRC, the Human Rights Commission, does. And they have one staff person who's full-time. They are like years behind. I believe at one point they were like 2 years behind in investigating claims. So it's already super hard to prove. You've got one person who might come and investigate you in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years. That's not a deterrent to employers. So yeah, if they don't want somebody who's got mental illness, if they don't want somebody who's a woman, who's pregnant, who's black, who's Latino, they'll just fire them. They'll just evict them. So we as a Commonwealth, we as a county, we are failing our marginalized communities because we have not put in place the systems to protect them so that they can become activists for themselves, so that they can speak out for their communities. You know, a big reason that I'm such an advocate in York County, I'll be very honest, is because I am hired by an organization who is based out of Philadelphia. So I am not dependent on people in this county to protect me. Now, I am afraid when I go out, you know, I'm dependent on the police department to protect me. You know, if I get put out of my house, I will have to find a way to deal with that. But, you know, when I think about people that are dependent on York County for their salary, they're dependent on York County for their food stamps or for their housing, you know, how can we judge those people for not coming out and fighting and standing up and being willing to engage in conversations even like this if we're not going to protect them and put laws in place to make sure that they cannot be victimized for speaking up? That's a huge failure on our part, on all of our part, that we have not done that for our most vulnerable citizens.
And that's, you know, that it is a failing. It's a big failing, and that's exactly my experience with being evicted. Was the landlord? I was a troublemaker. I went to the Attorney General's office about him. He was doing illegal things. But did Tom Kearney and the DA's office investigate? Nope. They investigated me twice, never found anything, but they never once investigated this guy. And if they had, they would know he has bad water on his trailer parks. He victimizes these people. I wouldn't even be surprised if he doesn't discriminate. I don't know how many people of color apply to be in his trailer parks, but I would almost bet my life that if someone did, he would find a way to deny them. So that, you know, you have a really good point there, and it's very true. And before we go any further, I do want to read this little quote that I read it to Carla earlier, and
It's powerful.
it's very good, and it's by a man named James Baldwin, and James Baldwin was an African American novelist, an essayist, playwright, poet, and social critic. And this is in 1962. This was a quote that he said in 1962. And he says, "I do not know many Negroes." Now you have to take in, you know, it was 1962, so that was accepted back then. "I do not know many Negroes who are eager to be, quote, accepted by white people, still less to be loved by them. They, the blacks, simply don't wish to be beaten over the head by the whites every instant of our brief passage on this planet." And then it goes on to say, to Baldwin, the issue was getting rid of segregation and police brutality, not cleansing whites' hearts of all racist sentiment, which blacks of his generation considered beside the point, not to mention impossible. I suspect many today concur. Baldwin's quote is very Black Lives Matter. But too often we get our heads turned in unproductive directions. This leads to an obsession not with racism as an obstacle to achievement, but with racism as page sticking, as a social stain to rub out. It's like trying to shame people who don't recycle or floss.
That's so true. And, you know, it is, when we talk about what is the, you know, what is the goal, you know, what are we looking for with these conversations? And yes, it would be ideal if we could have relationships that had peace and love and kindness and acceptance at the root. but we can't even have the open, honest conversations. We can't have the real relationship building until we have safety. And when we still have people denying that there are Black people that are afraid about their home, they're afraid about losing their job, they're afraid about going out in public, afraid about going out at night because they're not going to be safe, you know, even from law enforcement at times, you know, how can we build further? How can we go further? And that to me is what Black Lives Matter is about. We're not asking for something real sophisticated and high tech. We're not asking for something, you know, super thoughtful or spiritual. We're saying very, very simply, don't kill me. As a person of color, I want to know that I am safe, that my children are safe, that my very basic human rights are protected. And then once we know that we're all starting from at least that equal playing field, where I know that you can't kill me because you disagree with me and you won't go to jail for it, whereas I might not be doing anything at all, and you know, my prison sentence, my arrest experience, my incarceration is going to be totally different from yours. And you know, that basic fundamental level of, we just must guarantee the safety of Black and brown people before we can have any other conversations, that's being argued with. It blows my mind that Black Lives Matter is so controversial. Like, how can saying someone's lives matter be something controversial? Well, okay, but doesn't everybody else's life matter? Well, yes, but right now we're talking about Black people that are not safe, that feel not safe, that statistically are proven not safe. They just want to not die. They want to not be evicted. They want to not be tased and beaten and abused. They want to not be incarcerated. You know, they want to not be arrested at, you know, astronomically higher rates than their white counterparts. They want to not be given 4 times the prison sentence than their white counterparts. They want to be able to have safe housing. They want to be able to have jobs to support their families. They want to have school systems where their children can get educated. And then we can talk about everything else. And people are saying, oh, well, you know, I don't know about this whole Black Lives Matter thing. I feel like that's divisive. You know, we shouldn't be talking about race. We shouldn't be making things about race. To me, that is the definition of what white privilege is. When you can say, well, we shouldn't even be talking about race. Race shouldn't exist. Okay, you know what, maybe in 50 years, 100 years, let's revisit that conversation and let's have it. But right now, today, in the America that we have to live in, every single day, without exception, somehow my experience in this world, in this country, is shaped by the fact that I am Black. There is some resource that I don't have. There is someone who says something to me. There's something I have to read. When I go into a store, I'm followed. And even though other customers came in and they're not followed, when I go to get my purchases, if I choose to purchase something there, the person behind me or a person who comes up after me will get served first, and then I get served. You know, every day there are little things that happen, things that I have to read, things that I have to see on Facebook, things that I have to hear. And knowing that this is my country, this is the place that I have to live, I cannot accept that race doesn't exist. I cannot accept that we shouldn't be talking about race because it shapes my life every day. So, you know, don't take that away from me. Don't deny my experience. Don't make my reality invisible because it's not yours. And if someone can say, well, I don't see racism, I don't experience racism, I think, well, you're lucky, good for you, that you, in your place of being Caucasian, being white, you don't see racism. You know, good for you. I will never know in my lifetime, I suspect, what it is like to feel that way. Because I feel the weight of my race. I feel the burden that comes from living in America with my skin color every single day. And for someone who does not know what it feels like to be in this skin, to tell me how I should feel, to tell me how I should act, how I should be dealing with the skin that I'm in, the arrogance, the betrayal that I feel hearing those words is devastating. And that someone could ever feel that they have the right to tell me how I should feel about being black when I am sitting here as a black woman. That to me is the definition of white privilege, and it is the root of so many of our problems. You know, I don't know what it feels like to be bipolar, for example. I can say I know some of what family members and friends have gone through, so I empathize. But if we're talking about what does someone who has bipolar disorder need, what is their reality like? I'm not going to say, well, I know the answer. Well, this is what they need. I'm going to ask. You know, I'm going to say, tell me your experience. Share with me your beliefs. Tell me what you need and how I, as an ally, can help. But I'm not going to come in and say, well, you know what? You don't really know what you need. But I'm going to tell you how I'm going to fix you, and I'm going to fix your life. That's not helping. That, with the best of intentions, is still oppressing.
Yeah, and what did you say when we were at the political forum that the Dispatch held?
That's right.
2 weeks ago or so. Yeah,
fascinating gathering.
Yeah,
of
it was very interesting. And one of the comments that I made was, I don't understand lawmakers doing exactly what you're saying. They're making these policies, but you're not talking to me who went through it. You know, I went through this. Why don't you talk to me and others like me that went through this? And it was your friend Eric, I believe, who said, was it with you, with us, but
That's
without
right.
us?
Not about us, without us.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah,
I
did,
remember that. I wrote it down.
Yeah.
And that is a rallying cry that we're hearing more and more. It started off in social justice circles. It's now spreading to education circles. You know, people are talking about, we cannot make policies, wide-ranging policies. We cannot have these conversations about how we're going to fix the issues in the cities without talking to the people in the cities. We're not going to be able to end racism without talking to people that are the victims of racism. We're not going to be able to deal with how we improve housing without talking to people in housing and what are their issues. You know, we could spend a fortune on, you know, fixing the windows when it turns out that it's the floors that are falling out. You know, we have to talk to the people really experiencing these things and then listen, really listen. I think that it's not just the key to race relations, it's the key to every kind of relations. If you are not speaking from your own personal experience, the most valuable thing you can do is listen compassionately, quietly, supportively, without trying to say, this is what you need to do, this is what you should do, well, this is what all people are like, this is what, you know, that's what I heard in the media, so that's what must be true. Just ask and listen, and be willing to change your actions accordingly. You know, we have to be willing to change. We have to be willing to get better. Like you said, read in your quote, I love it, where you're like, you know, we used to refer to black people as Negroes or worse, and then we learned to do better. It probably was awkward at first. It took a while, but we learned to do different and better. That to me is what's American. Being American is saying, you know what, some of these systems over here, we can fix that. We can do it better. Being American has never been about preserving the status quo. It's never been about doing something the same way and refusing to change, refusing to get better. It's always been, at its best, I think, about finding new ways, finding innovation, finding more effective ways to do it. If our country is becoming increasingly Black and Hispanic, how is it better for our country not to provide the highest quality of life for Black and Hispanic people? How is it not best for our country to make sure that Black, Hispanic, and white people, and Asian people, and Native American people can all live together in harmony and work together to make America the best country that it can be? I wish somebody else, that's something that I will ask, because that's not my understanding, and I don't know why anyone would feel that that's not best. Why is it not best? How could it possibly be not best for all of these wonderfully different, interesting, engaging communities to be able to coexist peacefully? Why wouldn't people want that? Why does it have to be that one's better than the other, or let's harass, or let's talk down to, let's keep this segregation and this pain and this hatred flourishing? Who benefits from that?
No one.
I don't know. I don't know. And yet, if it doesn't help anyone, if it doesn't make anyone happier, why generation after generation after generation is it still there?
I can't answer it either. I wish I could. And when you're talking about the Black Lives Matter, I think people miss the point that you're not saying that only Black Lives Matter. It's Black Lives Matter too. Black Lives Matter. So don't go around judging and shooting and targeting someone because of the color of their skin.
Right. It's trying to get people to acknowledge that there is a difference in society. When we, and my mom's family is white, and my mom's family are the ones that very lovingly, caring, and compassionately raised me. And they're wonderful, thoughtful, and very diverse people, like what you said with your mom. There are so many great, wonderful people out there. And that is another thing I think the media does wrong, is that they put out a lot of the negative images, not just of Black people, but of white people too, because that makes news. There's so many people doing good work, doing racial justice work, doing reconciliation work on every side of the color line. There are some of the most amazing white people doing activism and doing reconciliation work right here in PA, in your county. Obviously, there are amazing allies doing great work, and we don't hear those stories. We don't see those put in the media in the same way. And I think it is important to hold up the stories of people that are doing it right, to change that narrative that we are so divided. Because in many ways, there's a lot of communities and people and friendships that are not. But, even in my own family, there's that need to ask the questions. I've had my own family come to me and say, well, what is this? What is it like for you? What are you dealing with? And I've had to explain to them and say, even though, you're my mom, you don't know what it's like in my skin. Even though you're my cousin, even though we're the same age, you don't know what it's like in my skin. And we have those conversations. It is true that no matter how much progress we've made, I think there is still money to be made. We need people to fill these private prisons. We need people to be taking part in these services. We need people to be putting money in the pockets of that wealthy 2% that's up there. And I think that can't be ignored when we talk about why does racism still continue. There are people who are financially benefiting from us being divided. Because if all the minority people got together, if all the progressives, if all the black people and the women and the mentally disabled and the physically disabled, and if all of us got together, we wouldn't be minorities. We'd be a majority. We'd be a powerful majority. And there are some people that are very scared of that. And that's why they want to keep us separate. And so by building relationships, that's all we can do to make sure they don't win.
Yeah, and that's been echoed. What you're saying has been echoed over and over again. In fact, I had a conversation very similar to this at the conference on Monday and Tuesday. And we talked about the fact that it's there's a gentleman, Daniel Hatch, I believe is his last name, who wrote The Poverty Industry. He wrote a book called The Poverty Industry. And that's exactly what he talks about. He talks about, these systems are set up to keep people poor so that they can't challenge. And the prison system is just a mess. I'm helping a friend right now whose granddaughter is incarcerated, and it's a horrible mess. And it's just, it boggles my mind that it's like, okay, well, we can't release you until you go into like a recovery house, which personally I don't think they're very good anyway. They're not regulated. There's a lot of issues that go along with them.
They're very up and down because of them not regulating. They were not putting those laws in place to protect a vulnerable population yet again.
Yeah, exactly. So they're telling her, well, you need to have this, but yet to go in there she has to have money because they don't take insurance, so she needs a job. But she's in prison, so she can't get the job.
Right.
But she needs it doesn't make sense.
And the prison record makes finding a job so much more difficult. The transportation, we put tons of barriers. Well, here, person, we took your license, but we need you to go get to a job and get to appointments and get to drug testing and get to counseling and therapy. And, but we do want you working, but all these appointments you have to go to are all during the day. We're going to schedule them with no regard to your work schedule, but we're going to charge you the money to pay for all of them. The system is set up for the people in it to fail. There can be no doubt about that. And for poor people who are desperate to get caught up in that system in the first place and then not be able to get out, and that system, that catches people of every race in that system. Disproportionately, black and brown people get put into that system, absolutely. But there are people of every skin tone that are in that system. And it's because there's people that are making money off it. There are people that benefit from us being divided. And we have to push through that and say, no, we're not going to let you, for the sake of profit, for the sake of tradition, for the sake of habit, for the sake of not wanting to admit you're wrong, for the sake of not wanting to make change. We are not going to let you continue to keep us divided. And we are going to fight and battle relentlessly to form relationships, to communicate with each other, to do everything that we can to change the narrative, to change the story, to change the stereotype, to put out there truths about what real people are like so that we can actually take back our country from this small percentage of people that want us to believe lies and untruths that make us feel more different than we really are. We have to be stronger than them.
And we have, I remember saying this, we said last week, I had Mike Wasakovich on, Mike.
Wonderful.
Mike knows you. And I think everybody knows you. But Mike and I were talking about Trump, a lot about Trump, and the hate mongering, the whole divisiveness, the whole scapegoating.
Playing on people's fears.
And it is. It's making things worse. And it kind of reflects, now you have the mayor of West York, like, okay, well, Trump does it, why can't I do it?
That's right, and he's a huge Trump fan, and that, I think, is one of the biggest dangers of him. He's giving people permission to say what they should be afraid to say, what they should know is not acceptable to say, what they should know isn't legal to say. They are now feeling like they can just come out and spread this division, this hatred, by playing upon people's fears. And that's what we're really battling against this election season this year and for the foreseeable future. We are battling not just against Trump, but against the hatred and fear that was already hiding in people's hearts that Trump just unleashed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just so overwhelming. And we just even start the dialogue, there has to be some trust. And how can there be trust when you have someone showing a picture of orangutans and it's just as I'm not black for anyone that didn't notice that. I'm like Casper Pale, but but I asked Yasser, the Yasser who's also on the board of contributors, Islam, he's a Muslim man, and I asked him, I said, how do you deal with that? I can't even imagine. Like, I know back in the day when they had the witch trials,
That's right.
Redheads got burned at the stake.
They sure did.
And so if, suddenly Trump decides, okay, well, I think redheads are, go back to burning those redheads because they're all witches. It's like, holy crap, what do I do now? I mean, I can't even imagine the level of fear to even walk out of your house.
That's right.
And who do you trust? I mean, and you got, because people manipulate. Someone can pretend, like Mike said, he has people that are, his friend until they find out he's gay.
That's right.
And then
all of a sudden,
be gay. You're gay. Ew. How can you do that? Well, I won't be your friend anymore.
That's right. You cannot just trust everyone. And so how can we have honest dialogue if you know that you can't just be safe, and that if you do disagree, that you're safe in that disagreement? It's one thing to have someone say, well, I'm not going to be friends with you anymore, but someone can say, well, I'm not going to be friends with you anymore, and because of that, I'm now going to fire you. I'm now going to harass and slander you on Facebook because I'm going to claim that that's free speech. Where do we draw that line? And that's why we've got to have these protections in place. We have to do better as a society so that we can say there is a space made for safe dialogue, for real conversation.
Okay. Ace is giving me, 3-minute signal? Okay.
Oh my goodness, that was the fastest hour in the history of the world.
Oh, you're definitely going to have to come back again.
Anytime.
Because we need to continue this. But in the couple minutes that we have left, why don't you talk a little bit about what you do with the Put People First? Is that what it's called?
Sure, yes. So I am the regional organizer for a human rights organization called Put People First Pennsylvania, which is at putpeoplefirstpa.org. And it's a great human rights group that works across the state. Right now, our main campaign is healthcare as a human right, which is how we got involved with the Housing is Health Coalition. Because talking about healthcare became important to us, because you can't do any other kind of advocacy. You can't take advantage of any opportunity if you don't have the health care that you need to do that. But when we talk about health care, it involves us in a lot of different things, from the health care that people are not getting in prisons and needing prison reform, to dealing with mental health and dealing with rehabilitation for people that are dealing with the disease of addiction and recovery and are not able to get the services they need to get them back into society and help maintain their recovery and their sobriety if necessary. We deal with housing is health, with people needing to have the opportunity to get safe housing where their children are not being exposed to things like black mold and lead paint that are causing lifelong disabilities and even learning disabilities that are affecting them for the whole course of their existence. So, we do a lot of work with that, and we have organizing committees, which are groups of volunteers that are committed to doing work locally. So we have groups from, Pennsylvania to Pittsburgh, but we have a great York organizing committee here, which is volunteers that come from different faith communities, that come from the elderly population, the people of color population, from the youth population, who all want to work together to say,
Hi folks, I'm Steve Butler. Welcome to the garage. This project, we're going to build these little tea lights. And I utilize my scraps of wood. They have a stainless steel top, some perforated metal. The aluminum comes in a long bar, and it's just aluminum channel that I cut. I drill a hole for the tea light, and that's our base. And the box itself